Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Treswaran, for your kind words. And thank you, Dr. Hani, for kindly inviting me to give this seminar. As I mentioned earlier, I've never been to Indonesia, but hopefully today's seminar will open up new doors. And I would love to visit you in person sometime, hopefully in the near future. So I will share my slides with you now. So good morning, everyone. Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi.
Thank you for your warm responses. Yeah, so hopefully my pronunciation is not too off. So my name is Long Lee, and I'm a lecturer in the Translation and Interpreting program at the University of New South Wales. As you can see, the title is One Book, Many Covers, a diachronic social semiotic approach to the study of translated book covers. Actually, I'm just going to set a timer so that I won't go over the time too much. So before I start, I would like to acknowledge the Badago people who are the traditional custodians of the land where I work and live. I pay my respect to the elders past and present. Australia always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So I would like to start by mentioning that today's seminar is part of a larger ongoing project. So essentially, it is based on my PhD project, which I completed at the Department of Linguistics at Macquarie University in Sydney. So it's about the influence of political ideology in the Chinese translations of highly valued English works by Chinese migrant writers. But because of my ongoing passion in researching the image of China in the West, especially through the writing and the translations of works by Chinese writers or Chinese migrant writers, I have ongoing plan to develop this project further. So I have studied both the book covers as well as the text proper, or what is inside the book. And I have studied not just the book called Wild Swans, but also another book written by a Chinese Australian writer called Mouselar Stancer. I don't know if anyone has heard of this book before. So in studying the text proper, or the what's inside the book, I have adopted theories and methodologies from descriptive translation studies, comparative linguistics between English and Chinese based on systemic functional linguistics, or SFL, as well as corpus linguistics. But today's seminar focuses only on the text of Wild Swans, in particular, the translated book covers of Wild Swans. But if you're interested in my linguistic analysis of Wild Swans and Mouselar Stancer, I will show you some. I will show you to some other publications. So that's where today's seminar is situated. So let's begin with the source text. Wild Swans, Three Daughters of China. It is a family chronicle, or we can say an autobiography, written by a female Chinese migrant writer called Dr. Zhuang Chan. She was actually the first person from the mainland China to receive a PhD in the United Kingdom. So I would like to just briefly unshare and ask if you have ever read this book, whether in English or in Indonesian, can you give me a thumbs up? Has anyone heard of this book or read this book?
Not yet.
No, not yet. Okay. So maybe you can consider that after the seminar. So this is I want to emphasize on the genre of family chronicle, because in this type of book, we assume historical truthfulness. It is not fiction. It is family chronicle or autobiography. Therefore, truthfulness is important. As of this year, 15 million copies have been sold internationally, making this book one of the best-selling family chronicles in the United Kingdom, not just by a Chinese writer, but by any British writer. So the sales figure is astronomical. It has been translated into over 40 languages, which again is astonishing. But of course, we know that any book that tends to sell well in the English-speaking countries will be translated into many languages, because English is a dominant language in the world. So we can safely claim that this is a highly valued work in the English language. And I have also adopted the Chinese translation for this study. So the Chinese title is 红三代中国女人的故事, or which can be back translated to English as Hong, Stories of Three Generations of Chinese Women. So you can already see some differences between the Chinese title and the English title, which is Wild Swans, Three Daughters of China. But we'll talk about the differences in the title and subtitle later. And the reason I have not back translated the character Hong will be reviewed later as well. So this was translated by Pu Zhang, who is in fact the brother of the author, Zhang Chen. It may be a bit confusing that Zhang and Chang look like two different Chinese surnames. In fact, they are the same surname, but just romanized in different systems. So the translator Pu Zhang is in fact a character who has appeared in this family chronicle. And so that's something that makes this translation quite special. It has been published in traditional Chinese in Taiwan, but also occasionally in Hong Kong. But it is virtually unknown in the mainland China. And this is mainly because the book Wild Swans take an anti-communist and anti-Maoist stance, and therefore it has been banned in mainland China. Although pirated simplified versions have been available in the mainland Chinese market. One reason that this translation strongly attracted me in the first instance is because this is a rather unusual translation situation, whereby you have writers who grew up in China and left for a Western country when they reached adulthood. So Zhang Chen left China at the age of around 26 or 28, I don't remember exactly, wrote a book in English about their life story in China. And surprisingly, the book became extremely successful in the English-speaking countries and subsequently translated back, if I may, back to the source author's native language. And the source author has also contributed to the translation decision-making. So this is not a case of self-translation because Zhang Chen did not translate the book herself, but she nevertheless contributed to the translation. For example, she wrote an introduction in Chinese for this version of the Chinese translation published in Taiwan. So in that sense, it perhaps challenges the notion of the source text being the golden standard. It makes us wonder, can the translation be as accurate, still be accurate even when it's different from the source text? Or can the Chinese translation be even more accurate historically than the English source text? And because the source author was involved in this process. And what was also interesting was that I could identify clear shifts in political ideology in the Chinese translation, even without detailed linguistic analysis. Although some of the early hypotheses that I formed just based on reading was later rejected through linguistic analysis. So perhaps that also suggests that there is always a strong element of subjectivity when unless we analyze something using a rigorous analytical framework. So now I will start sharing the translated book covers. So translation and interpreting are both multimodal in nature because we handle not just language, but also many other system of meaning making. For example, in interpreting, we have to handle sound. In translation, we often have to handle images. Even when translating a written text, we have to make printing decisions like font, size, and color. All of these carry meaning on their own. And of course, the list goes on. There's many different semiotic systems or systems of meaning making. But within translation studies, there remains a gap in multimodal translation, or what Roman Jacobson terms Inter-Semiotic Translation. That is the translation of one semiotic system like language to another semiotic system like image or graphic design. And this is largely because translation is generally conceptualized as the rendering of only written text to written text. So any text that is not written has generally been neglected by scholars. On the other hand, multimodal scholars have generally neglected translation issues, except for for audio-visual translation, which has gained more attention. So when I started this sub-project on translated book covers, I was surprised that there weren't many systematic studies of translated book covers. So that's the reason that I turned to some theories and methodologies in multimodal studies. So linguistically, I have adopted the appraisal framework and corpus tools for analyzing linguistic elements and the text-image relations. I also borrow the notion of paratext by Gannett, because translated cover is a form of paratext, which means it is not the text proper. It is not the main thing that readers pay attention to, although it is extremely important because it's right in the front and it may influence your decision to buy the book or to read the book or not. I also take into account of typological differences between English and Chinese, and also between the UK, America, and Taiwan in terms of cover design and graphic design. But most importantly, I turn to visual grammar by Krasem and Leuven. So this framework has been widely adopted in multimodal discourse analysis. It has also been strongly influenced by a linguistic framework by Michael Halliday called Sistemik functional linguistics. So I will explain how this is a benefit to translation studies or to multilingual studies. I want to highlight the word grammar because I think usually we talk about grammar of language, but it's quite rare that we talk about grammar in visual design, right? Yeah, so that's a notion that is that can be quite new, but yeah, only through reading their work can we be convinced that, oh, actually, there are also grammatical patterns, and certain grammar creates certain meaning. So that's why this is a really powerful tool for us to interpret images in a more rigorous and less subjective manner. I won't say that the analysis can be 100% objective, but it certainly is helpful in reducing researcher subjectivity. So one important benefit to scholars who handle multiple languages is that there is shared ground between linguistics and multimodality using this framework, in that any text is assumed to, any text realizes three functions at the same time, whether the text is verbal or visual or mix of verbal and visual. So that includes the ideational, interpersonal, and textual functions. So the ideational function is to represent people, places, things, and action. The interpersonal is to enact relationships and engage our attention and interest. The textual function is to organize both the ideational and the interpersonal, both visually and verbally, into one coherent text. So now I'll briefly cover some systems within visual grammar within each of the three functions. And I will also share my findings according to each of the three functions. Of course, this is just a tiny bit of visual grammar. If you're interested, you can always refer to the book to find out more. So within the ideational function, we can analyze the process. So what is going on in these images? We can broadly distinguish narrative process versus conceptual process. So a narrative process is one whereby some action is happening. So, for example, how would you describe the first image? Can you use one English sentence to describe this picture? Any volunteers?
A robbery.
A robbery
case.
Yeah, exactly. A robbery case, or a man is robbing a woman. Yeah. So, but in your case, you nominalize, you turn this into a noun. Yeah. So it's very abstract. How about the second picture? Can someone use one English sentence to describe the second photo?
There's a cat.
There's a cat. Yeah. So you see the two images are different. The first one is narrates an action, and the second one is conceptual. It's static. Yeah. So there isn't any clear action that the cat is performing. It's not clear whether the cat is thinking or reacting to something. So we can say the second picture is more static, whereas the first one is more dynamic. Yeah, so of course, we can still interpret the images differently. Yeah, so even though the man is pointing a gun at the woman, we can still say, oh, he's a coward. He's not dynamic. He's a coward. He's doing, how can he do this to a lady? Yeah, and where the second one, we can still say, oh, the cat looks so strong. The cat can destroy, can catch 20 mice in a day. We can still have our subjective interpretations, but we have to accept that the images present the man as being quite dynamic, and the second photo presents the cat as being passive. Yeah, and the good thing is that we can also, so that's an action, and this is a symbolic picture. And we can also relate the images to linguistic resources. So we have systems such as transitivity and agency, which help us construe similar meaning using language. For example, the man robbed the woman, or an armed robbery occurred. So there are two different ways to represent a similar event. Whereas the second one, you can say something like Russian blue is beautiful. Okay, so you can see how we can combine visual grammar and linguistic grammar to analyze a multimodal text, to look at the meaning at large, the combined meaning. So likewise, there are systems in the interpersonal function. For example, shot of frame is a system in the interpersonal function. So when there is a long shot, this position the two men as being very distant, or two people. I don't know, actually, I can't be sure of the gender. The images position the two people as being very far away and distant from us as readers. Whereas this guy, because of the extreme close-up shot, it positions Simon Cowell to be very, very close to us. Even though we might still resist him. No, I don't feel close to him. We have to accept that the image positions him to be very close to us. So likewise, we have corresponding linguistic system, such as the level of formality. We can use system like mood. If I say, Mr. Lee, may I offer you some tea? I'm being very formal. I'm saying, Mr. Lee, I'm not close to you. I'm trying to be polite. But if someone says, Nate, try this, then so that suggests that we are very close. So we have linguistic resources to achieve similar effect. Lastly, in the textual function, which is about organization, one system could be salience. So that can be achieved through foregrounding. So in this picture, you may recognize that this man appears to be more important, more salient because of size difference. He's much larger than those people in the background. So size can foreground certain elements visually. Whereas this is also salient, but it's achieved through different system, which is the lighting. The lighting highlights this man and makes him stand out from the background. So there's different ways to achieve salience visually. And likewise, we have corresponding linguistic system. For example, if I say, I cannot stand him, it's quite ordinary. But if I say, I cannot stand, then I'm giving more emphasis to he. So it's as if I am giving this he some visual spotlight, or making him larger than he looks. So I hope these three slides show you how we can relate the meaning created by images and meaning created by linguistic elements and combine them to look at the total meaning. Now, so based on the visual grammar and other methodologies and theories, I have proposed a framework which enables us to analyze both the verbal and the visual elements in translated book covers. you don't have to read everything here. So basically, I want to show that all the different systems are divided into the three functions. And the rank basically means the rank of language. So work here refers to the whole cover, and episode is part of the cover. For example, the title or the images of the three women. That's one episode. And then figure is part of an episode. For example, one woman out of the three, or the eyebrow or the eyes, the lips of that woman. So that's basically the different structure. These are the structural units. And now let's begin with the analysis of the translated covers. This is from the author's personal website that you can access. And if you take a quick glance at the different covers in various languages, you may agree that there's great variation in how the front covers are translated. For example, this French cover shows only the author's image. And I can tell you that the subtitle, Three Daughters of China, is not translated. You only have the title. The Brazilian cover has no image. And the Croatian cover, you see different images that the English language covers do not use. And this may look a bit more familiar to you. Hani has kindly shared this Indonesian cover with me. Again, it looks very different from the English source cover. I was a bit shocked to see this at first because, again, I cannot find the subtitle. I think the subtitle is Tiga Putri Cina. But I do not find it on the cover. And the image that the Indonesian cover uses, so that's actually the mother. That's not the author herself. Again, that's something that really surprised me. So a quick comparison seems to suggest that perhaps translators and publishers may feel they have more power and liberty in handling the translation of the covers, more so than what's inside the book. So this is my corpus. It contains 3 English language covers and 3 Chinese language covers. Basically, I have selected the very first and the most recent cover in each language, together with a midway version. So the 2003 US version and the 2006 Taiwanese version. So that's how I've picked the 3 covers. But there are more covers in each language. And because I will refer to them as English covers or English language covers and Chinese language covers, because definitely the 1991 cover is the source cover for the 1992 Taiwanese cover. But we can't really say the same for the subsequent pairs. Especially, you may notice that the 2016 British cover was published after the 2015 Taiwanese cover. So they are not exactly source text and target text. So that's why I'll refer to them as English and Chinese language covers. And so that's how I've selected text in this diachronic study to look at the evolvement of covers across time. Now I will share some results and discussions in terms of what's the same and what's different, both visually and linguistically, in each of the 3 functions that I mentioned earlier. I will also address the intersemiotic relations, that is, how within one cover, how do the visual elements relate to the linguistic elements? Do they combine to tell the same story, or do they talk about different things? And I will also address the intertextual relations, that is, how is the cover related to the text proper? So, which means, can we judge a book by its cover? Or are we being misled by the cover? Perhaps the text proper is quite describe very different things that is not revealed by the front cover. So I will start with the ideational function. Even though I have analyzed more systems than these, I will basically try and cover perhaps one visual element and one verbal element in each of the three functions. So in the ideational function, I will talk about the title and the subtitle, because these are the most important linguistic elements in informing readers what the cover and what the book is about, what is represented on the cover. I will also talk about the images of the women and how the images represent them to readers. So to begin with, I found that the English covers and the Chinese covers are overall very similar, especially in the ideational function, especially when we compare them to some other language covers, such as, I guess, even Indonesian cover. The Chinese covers are more similar to the English covers. What do I mean by that? Well, all English and Chinese covers contain a title and a subtitle. So that's different from the Indonesian and the French, whereby there's no subtitle. All of them use the same images of the same three women. Again, that contrasts with many other language covers. There is even a resemblance in the background color and the overall style. So for example, both the 1991 and the 1992 covers use rather muted colors like dark green and dark purple. And both the 2003 and 2006 covers use bright, vibrant colors like red and orange. 2016 and 15 covers both use a rather simplistic modern style, which may be the preferred standard of aesthetics in the last 5 to 10 years. So we can conclude that there are clear influence from English covers on Chinese language covers. And this may be because of the writer's personal involvement in the Chinese translation. Perhaps that's why the Chinese covers show more influence from the English covers. And next up is the representation of the women. So we might start by asking, who are they? Especially because most of you haven't read the book. So who are these women? Apparently, they are daughters of China. Is that helpful? Daughters of China. But other than that, the cover doesn't tell us more about their identity. You need to turn the page to learn that, okay, so this is the author, John Chen, Dr. John Chen. This is her mother, who is actually on the Indonesian cover. And this is her mother's mother, her maternal grandmother. And you can see that the Chinese translation is compliant in the sense that the same images are used. But when it comes to the visual representation, we may say that these are beautiful female images. Of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but we can refer to more objectively measurable aspects, such as the balanced proportionality of the face and the airbrush quality of the skin. Yeah, so these are beautiful images, but they do not display any vibrant behaviors nor any agency, which means they are not represented to impact on the world around them. They are static conceptual images that we mentioned earlier. How about the linguistic representation of the women in the book? Do they have more agency? Well, according to my linguistic analysis, in fact, this kind of beautiful but passive representation is congruent with what's inside the book. So the women can be considered bearers rather than drivers of history in China. The people who were the drivers of history were mostly male leaders of China and some female leaders, but these three women were more passive, both visually and linguistically. So this may challenge the common perception that, this book is about female empowerment, is about feminism, but actually the women are not represented to be with high agency. And the inclusion of three women also raises the question about gender representation. is the book really only about the three main female characters? So perhaps there is no important male characters in the book. So that's where I used a corpus linguistic tool, a concordance tool, and I found two important male characters. The first one is the father, who is in fact the greatest victim in the book, having been persecuted to death in the Cultural Revolution of China. But he's nowhere to be found on the cover. Another important character is Mao, the leader of China. And he has also appeared more frequently than the grandmother. Again, the front cover does not represent Mao either verbally or visually. Well, except for this line here, which mentions that the author Zhang Chen has written another book about Mao. So this is a very interesting aspect of the source cover. We know the book has a strong anti-Maoist stance, but the front cover does not reveal this motif. So this makes the cover and the text proper incongruent. There's one important motif, that is anti-Mao motif, is hidden from the front cover. The front cover represents beautiful but passive Asian females. And so that is really worthwhile of contemplation. So perhaps one explanation could be the publishers would like to promote this book as one that is written by a woman about women for female readers, because usually perhaps women are more likely to read novels and autobiographies like this one. But that comes at a cost, whereby important male characters are not represented on the cover. The only instance where also obviously the Chinese translation is against compliant with the English source cover in this aspect because of the same images. The only aspect where the Chinese translation deviates from the English text is the title. So you can kind of see that the Chinese title is this character Hong, and the character also appears on the English front cover, although it's more like a picture that readers cannot understand. But you may agree with me if I say that it looks like a bird with a long neck. Yeah, so that's like a pictorial character resembling a long-necked bird. And perhaps that's the visual elaboration of the title Wild Swans. So this may resemble a swan in the way that the daughters of China are elaborated by the female images. But where does this character come from? So it was chosen as the title because it's the mother's name and the Chan's nickname. And according to the author, this character means wild swans. And in British English, in the year that the book was published, swan is associated with whiteness, beauty, and romance. So the title carries strong feminine and romantic connotations. The epithet wild does not turn swan into a different bird. It is still swan, but one that is free, that is untamed. So it has connotations such as freedom and courage, perhaps pointing to the author's journey of leaving China behind to seek freedom in her adopted country. But when it comes to the Chinese translation, it surprised me to read that the author considers the character to mean wild swan, because my first reaction was that this character means swan goose. It's a kind of goose, it's not a kind of swan. So when I looked up dictionaries and corpora in Chinese, I found that Hong only means swan in ancient Chinese. But in contemporary sense, the most typical interpretation is swan goose. So when the author translated the character from Hong into wild swans in the first place, this is a rather unexpected translation choice by the author. That's an image of a goose or swan goose. And sometimes people say that the word goose suggests silliness in English. So maybe that's partially why, but of course that's not the only, you don't have to you can always try a different title if you don't want to call yourself goose. Right? But the image of swan or wild swan is very different. It has strong feminine and romantic connotations in the English language. So I suggest that these several instances that carry strong feminine connotations, words such as swan, daughter, and the all-female representation on the front cover suggest are likely influenced by an ideology called Orientalism. So that's a prevalent ideology in the West, conceptualizing an East that is different, feminine, immature, and irrational, in contrast to a West that is everything but. And importantly, while the East is considered to be different and other, Asian likability is more associated with the female members. So perhaps these strong feminine and romantic representation on the cover is part of a marketability strategy to promote the book by relying on the likability of Asian females. And perhaps that's the reason that important male characters have been hidden from the front covers. How about the Chinese translation? So the image of swan has been avoided in Chinese. This character does not look like a bird. You might agree. And so in this way, in fact, when Chinese readers see this character, there's no immediate meaning. It can have multiple meanings, such as grand, letters, swan goose, etc. There's no fixed meaning to this character. In this way, perhaps it can avoid potential questions and criticism from Chinese readers. And interestingly, the very mention that Hong meaning wild swans from the text proper has been omitted in Chinese. So the Chinese translation does not explain that Hong means wild swans or swan. So we have talked about overall similarities in the ideational function, but some decisive differences in Chinese. The next function is the interpersonal, that is the positioning of the represented participants to readers. We'll also talk about the writers' and translators' names because all the information such as gender, race, ancestry, and nationality can have crucial relevance in how the people are positioned to readers. So when we analyze the visual grammar, we find that the women are positioned to be close to Western readers, even though they are clearly exotic, right? They are East Asian, and there's a Chinese character, and there is this mysterious Chinese pavilion in the background. So clearly exotic, but nevertheless close to Western readers. They also demand reader attention and invite readers into their world because they look at you. There is direct gaze. They have equal power with readers because the camera angle of the photos are at an eye level, which suggests equality. Even though these are extraordinary women in China, they are positioned to be equal to Western readers. And they are also part of the reader's world because the images are mostly frontal, which means we are part of the same world, even though they are exoticism. And the Chinese translation is again compliant because of the choice of the same three women. But we may expect that if the English text positioned the women to be close to Western readers, shouldn't the Chinese translation position them to be even closer to Chinese readers because these are Chinese women and perhaps the Chinese readers would feel intimacy with them? In fact, that is not quite the case, even though overall they are similar, because the Chinese translations include clear markers of the book being a translation. So this part means it's translated by Pu Zhang. Yeah, and the author's English name, John Chen, is included on the Chinese cover, reminding Chinese readers, this woman, this author is from a different world and speaks another language. The author has not written this book in your language. So this reminds readers and creates more distance between the author and the readers. Likewise, the translator's name, the title of the book in English. And the mention that the book has been translated into 30 languages with a global sales figure of more than 12 million copies. And the most recent one also includes the translator's name and the English title. So all these markers of translation status serve to increase the distance between the women and Chinese readers, which is actually quite unexpected. And in translation studies, we may consider this to be foreignization, reminding readers that this work is not written in the target language, but it comes from an exotic language and culture. And so interpersonally, we also see similarities, but the distance between the women and readers have increased somewhat in the Chinese translations. And lastly, in the textual function, it is about the organization. So we'll look at the salience of the name of the author and of the translator, because within limited space, how much space is given to the author's name and the translator's name has significant meaning about their importance. We'll also talk about framing, which is a device that can highlight and accentuate individuality in the images. So the first one is the salience of the author's name. What do you notice when you look at Zhang Chen's name on the English covers? Zhang Chen, Zhang Chen, Zhang Chen. What do you think about the size?
They're quite prominent.
Yeah, they are huge. Yeah, they're huge, very prominent. And of course, this is significant. This suggests to readers that the author Zhang Chen is a celebrity. She's an extremely important writer internationally in the English language. So the extra size highlights her stardom, at least in the Western context. How about the Chinese translations? So Zhang Chen, and Zhang Chen. Much smaller, aren't they? So even without knowing Chinese, you can see the dramatic difference in the size. So the size of the author's name suggests that she's not as well known and significant in the Chinese language. Again, some of you may wonder, could that be a cultural difference? Maybe Taiwanese books don't usually print the author's name in large fonts. I had the same hypothesis, but when I browsed through book titles, book covers on online bookstores in Taiwan, I saw many books that would print the author's name in extra large fonts, but none of these translations has done that. So this clearly shows the lesser importance and fame of the author in the Taiwanese context. And another interesting finding is that the Chinese translation is quite different from the English source text in that the generational gap is more emphasized on the Chinese language covers. The family hierarchy becomes more prominent. So when we see the English subtitle, Three Daughters of China, if you still remember it, the women are one group. They're all the same. They're all daughters of China. There is no difference among the three. So that is most clear in the 2003 US cover, whereby you see this is just one group of women. They are not separated. There is no framing for each of the three women. And there is no clear hierarchy among them. So that is most congruent with the subtitle Three Daughters. So the English source text do not emphasize on the differences among the three women. But the Chinese translation highlights the generational gap. The title is Three Generations of Chinese Women. The term generation highlights that these are three different generations. And you can see that visually, all the photos on the Chinese covers are strongly framed. And all of them are arranged vertically, from the grandmother at the top to the mother, and then to the author herself. Of course, we have similar arrangements on the British covers, but that is incongruent with the subtitle in English. Yeah, so this emphasis on the generational hierarchy is more prominent in Chinese. And I consider that perhaps is a strategy of domestication in the Chinese context, because the sense of family hierarchy is important in according to the Chinese values of Confucianism, whereby the vertical relations are important. So it's very interesting that we discover strategies of both foreignization and domestication on the Chinese translations. Normally, there is one clear orientation, but on the Chinese covers, we have found both domestication and foreignization. Okay, next up, I will summarize the findings by function. So within the ideational function, we find that the English covers present feminine imageries, which are influenced by an Orientalist ideology. And this may be a strategy to promote the book, but at the same time, it masks important motif of anti-Maoist ideology. The Chinese covers show strong English source cover influence, but at the same time have reduced the influence of Orientalism. Within the interpersonal function, we see that the English covers position these beautiful and likable Asian females to align them with Western readers. And elsewhere, I have also identified strong press blurbs praising the extraordinary quality of the book in English, and also promote the book as a great tragedy. And on the Chinese translation covers, there is, again, strong source cover influence. But we find increased distance due to strategies of foreignization. And the Taiwanese covers mainly promote the book by referring to the sales figure of the source text, but not of the Chinese translation, which is very interesting. And so it promotes the translation by referring to the source text. And there is also a shift of genre from a great tragedy to a touching family story, which is aligned with my linguistic analysis that the Chinese translations are more personal and less political than the English source text. Because, of course, when you present a book as a tragedy, then the question arises as to what causes the tragedy, who is responsible. And then you have to interpret history and the leaders of China at the time. But the Chinese translation is more personal. Within the intertextual function, that's where I found the greatest shift. The English source text strongly highlight the stardom of both the author John Chen and the work as being a significant book for Western readers to understand China. But this is where greatest shifts have occurred in Chinese, that the covers are plainer and more detached. It does not highlight the significance of the translation or the celebrity status of the source text, the source author John Chen in Taiwan. And there's also an interesting domesticated emphasis on family hierarchy, adhering to certain values in Chinese culture. And next up, I will also conclude on intersemiotic and intertextual relations. We find strong influences of the English language covers on the Chinese language covers, but there are several shifts in certain instances, especially in relation to the influences by Orientalism and also the importance of family hierarchy in Chinese culture. There is great complementarity between the verbal elements and the visual elements within a cover. So the title is elaborated by the pictorial character resembling a bird, and the subtitle is complemented by the images of the three women. But when it comes to the relation between the cover and the text proper, we find some congruence and some incongruence. Congruence is the image of the three women being beautiful, likable, but passive, lacking agency. And that is consistent both in the cover and also in the text proper. We find incongruence, that is the importance of male characters such as the father and Mao have not been revealed by the front cover. So these may come as a surprise as you turn past the front cover and start reading the book. So we can say that perhaps we can partially judge these books by their covers. Now, I'll end with the contributions of this study. So I hope it has shown how important meanings can be found on their covers and their translations, complementing what is found inside the book. So I hope that maybe this talk can interest and encourage some of you to pay more attention to the meanings expressed on the front covers, because that's still a very much largely neglected issue. And it provides, and personally, if I hadn't specifically studied the front covers, I would have missed certain important meanings, such as Orientalism and the translation of the title and the subtitle, etc. So this paying more attention, specific attention to the cover have opened up new doors for me. It has provided an applicable analytical framework based on visual grammar for studying translated book covers. Yeah, so I think this is a powerful tool that helps reduce researcher subjectivity. It contributes to bridging the gap or closing the gap in multimodal translation studies. It highlights the importance of context in analyzing any text, whether translated or not. And context can be synchronic, that is, differences between between the United Kingdom and Taiwan, and it can be diachronic, so historical changes across time. We find that some differences between English and Chinese have been reduced with time. From 1991 to 2016, some differences have been reduced, perhaps as an influence of globalization. And lastly, it manifests the crucial influence of ideology in the creating and translating politically charged texts. So both the source text and the Chinese text have been strongly influenced by political ideology. So that guarantees the importance of further awareness and attention and research into the important aspect of ideology and text, and ideology and translation. So my seminar today is based on these two relevant publications, which I heard that Dr. Hani has already kindly shared with your students in some courses. I feel very privileged in hearing that. So if you're interested, these are the two publications that inform today's talk. And if you're interested in the study of the text proper, that is what's inside the book, linguistic analysis of the English text and the Chinese text, these are publications on the linguistic analysis. So I'll be more than happy to share copies with you if you contact me by email. Okay, terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much for attending my seminar today. And now I'm ready for any questions and comments.